Hello, coming at you live from Staring Into the Abyss TM. It's me, Richard Gerlach. With me, as always, is Matt Brandenburg.
And I'm Staring Into the Abyss Part 2, The Staring.
And also, Vitlame Mist.
And I'm Staring at the Abyss Part 3, The Abyssening.
And is Part 3 the one that has nothing to do with Part 1 and Part 2, but they're just calling it Part 3 to keep in line with the franchise name?
Yeah, it has a lot of witchy themes in it.
Nice.
Yeah,
Perfect.
It was going to be a completely different podcast, but they're like, no, we already have that name, so let's just stick the name in there and make some random reference.
Didn't they do that with The Howling 3 or something?
They've done this so many movies.
So today, our main focus. I'm still caught up thinking that. The main focus is horror sequels, specifically horror book sequels, and how if you think of horror movies, you think of all these franchises that make money on top of money on top of money, right? You got your Jasons, your Friday the 13th, your Halloween movies, your Final Destination, which that caught on huge. Your Screams, you got so many. It Follows is getting a sequel, which I think is kind of cool. I'm excited for that.
A Quiet Place.
Yeah,
A Quiet Place surprisingly turned into a franchise. Which, has anyone seen the prequel yet?
No,
but after I checked whether the cat lives or not, I want to watch it now.
I hear there's a really awesome scene with the cat, and the cat was a really good actor.
Yep.
So you're the first person I thought of when I heard that, Vitlame, just to let you know.
Yeah, I know. I was intrigued, but then I saw on the fucking poster, she is holding a cat, and I'm like, oh my god, please let the cat live. And the first thing I did, I went online and I was like, I just Googled does he live? Because I don't want to go through the turmoil of just being a wreck watching the cat die.
Well, it's funny because my cat is very vocal. She's always talking, and so
my cats are so like that. If this would ever happen, we'd be so dead. It's you're gonna be the death of me. No surprises there.
No.
I mean, honestly, though, it'll be worth it. You got to keep that company.
Yeah.
At least if you go down, you don't go down alone.
I mean, if I would just turn the entire apartment just soundproof, then it should be fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
eight cartons, you're good to go.
Yeah, it makes me wonder though, in this kind of situation with A Quiet Place. I mean, there are a lot of soundproof rooms nowadays. I would imagine some people probably might be able to survive.
Yeah, true. I think, it's very questionable. Do they attract, I don't know. I've only seen the first movie, and I was like, good enough. I don't need to see any more. So
same.
I agree. I've seen the second movie. The second movie's trash. But there are certain places, there are certain movies where they should just be a standalone. So I think that could also be a good discussion today.
Yeah, it could be. Also, I'll move over this into the movie portion soon, or our media consumption portion. I got some movies to talk a bit about too. The writers of A Quiet Place, the two guys who wrote the script for A Quiet Place, their new directed movie is actually one of my most anticipated movies of the year.
Nice.
Acolyte.
Oh,
they did that?
No, the Acolyte, Heretic, the Hugh Jackman movie. No, Hugh Jackman. Hugh Grant. Hugh Grant.
I was like, whoa, that would be a twist if that was Hugh Jackman, though.
Yeah. No, the Hugh Grant horror movie coming out.
He wouldn't pull it off as much as Hugh Grant would, though.
No, Hugh Grant's gonna pull it off so good, though.
That's what I'm saying. The pipeline from him being this kind of goofy guy to a complete creep is amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think that movie looks so fucking good.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, this is gonna be a fun podcast, and I do want to say before we get started, a lot of these books that we're going to be talking about when it comes to like sequels and it comes to franchises, most of us haven't read all of them. We are not trying to say anything negative about the books or the quality or their stories. We're just kind of having a discussion about this topic and noting an observation and kind of a trend that we've seen. And it's something that we kind of want to unpack as a podcast.
Yeah.
But this is not meant to throw shade at any books whatsoever.
And like, we're not gonna cover everything that maybe has a sequel that we don't know about, because I mean, look how many books there are out. How many books come out a year? There could be a ton
how many books are like a sequel to something you never realize that they're a sequel to something?
Right. Or just in general, there's a series of horror books out that we might not know about. So like just kind of think of it more as general, like why we see horror movies have lots of sequels, why we see fantasy and sci-fi have a lot of sequels, romance has a lot of sequels, and just like, why does it seem like horror fiction maybe not so much? I mean, and maybe that we'll discover that there's a lot more. Listeners can definitely tell us if there's a million sequels out there that we don't know about. But anyway,
100%. We should move on to our media consumption.
Yeah,
because I have a book that I finished the other day that has completely fixed my reading slump.
Excellent.
And like I'm fucking hooked on reading again now. It's great. It's really great to like be in a slump for a while and finding this one book to like pull you right out.
Yeah.
And getting you right back into it. And that book was Incidents Around the House by Josh Malerman.
Oh, okay.
And let me tell you, this book is tight, it's mean, and it's bleak as fuck. And that makes a great horror novel, to me, in my opinion. And to make matters worse, the main character is just an 8-year-old girl who doesn't really understand anything about what's going on in her life.
Awesome.
But the premise of the story is pretty much, it focuses on Bella. She's our narrator. She's an 8-year-old girl. She lives in Michigan. And she has a family, her mom and dad, who she loves both very much. And she had who she believed was an imaginary friend who she called Other Mommy, who would come out of her closet at night and make strange and funny faces. But now Other Mommy stopped making those faces and has begun getting scarier and angrier towards Bella and is asking Bella to let Other Mommy into her heart. And Bella asks what happens if she does, and all Other Mommy says is, I'll become you and you go where I live. And the more Bella refuses, the more Other Mommy gets angrier and bad things begin to happen.
Awesome.
And it is such a good read. Like, it's fast. It packs a punch. You kind of care about the characters, even if one character is going to piss you off a lot, you still kind of care about the dynamics of all of them. And then it just gets so crushingly heartbreaking by the end.
Okay, I like that.
And like Malerman, who a lot of people love Malerman. For me, Malerman's been kind of hit or miss. But all his hits for me have been home runs.
Yeah.
And this is his grand slam.
Oh, that's great.
I got to keep that baseball analogy up. But no, like, this is his, like, in my opinion, I've sat on it for over a week, and I think this is his best book.
Wow. Okay.
Like, it is no hyperbole. Like, it's fucking awesome. And I will say, though, there probably will not be a sequel to this one, unlike Bread Box.
Okay, yeah, yep, you're right. Continue. Sorry.
Yeah, because he wrote the Mallory sequel, The Bird Box.
Yeah, he did.
Which, I liked Mallory. I thought it was a good book. Not a great book, but a good book.
I think I've only read a couple of his stuff. So
yeah, I mean, I think he's a good writer for what he does. I think he knows how to create really good suspense, and he knows how to create interesting character dynamics.
Yeah,
that tend to propel the plot forward. I will say though, in this book, the mother is the fucking worst.
the other mother or the
no,
mother?
The real mother. She's terrible. She makes very frustrating decisions, and like I won't say why because of spoiler reasons, but like it makes sense because of spoiler reasons.
Gotcha.
And she sucks also because of spoiler reasons. But yeah, it's one of those books where like one of my favorite types of horror stories, and you don't really get to see these stories all that much, is those stories when our characters are up against something that they don't know what it is, and they lack the ability to understand what it is. Mm-hmm. And despite all their trying, they'll never understand what this thing is and how to go against it.
Yeah.
That's one of these stories. And I love that because it just creates this hopeless feeling in the characters and in the narration and in the text that I think is really intriguing, but it also definitely, bad things are going to happen like very soon as it's going down. But I still have a couple others, but I'll go over to Matt for next.
Yeah, so I have been reading Chronicles of the Black Company by Glen Cook. So this is a fantasy series talking about sequels and stuff like that. It's actually the first three of the Black Company stories all in one. And it came out like in the 80s. So anyway, it follows this group called the Black Company, which is a group of mercenaries that will work for the good guys, the bad guys, whoever's paying them. And they join up basically with the bad guy. At first it was sort of unintentional because there's this they call it the lady. Yeah, your basic fantasy kind of evil superpowered person that wants to rule the world. And underneath the lady, she has these 10 like unburied things that are her generals. And again, fantasy, they're super powerful. They got magic and stuff like that. Well, they kind of work with them to defeat the rebels. And then you slowly realize the rebels have this kind of the antithesis of the lady, which is the White Rose, who she beat the ultimate evil years ago. And now it's like they kind of are waiting for her magical return or rebirth. And so that's kind of what the rebels are basing their campaign on. They're like, we're going to bring back the White Rose, and the White Rose is going to defeat the lady, and the world's going to be happy. But we're kind of not focused on any of that. We're focused on the mercenaries and what the mercenaries are doing. And they're really good at their job, which is stopping the rebels and being nasty, bad people. And then slowly in this book series, in these 3 books, this trilogy, they like kind of lose favor with the lady. They realize that she's not, that was surprised that she's evil, and they decide not to work with her, and they are running away and then trying to defeat her. That's a real basic concept of this. It is really good. It is written really well, and I hear about this this book, this trilogy, the series a lot. Like it's one of those kind of like underrated best kind of series out there into fantasy, and I can see it. He writes it really well. It's very it feels, and I think I saw somebody review it, kind of, I don't want to say Vietnam War-esque, but it's just that idea of like these small group of people having to do a lot of different missions and like kind of the questionable things they do, because they do a lot of questionable things in this. And that's one of the things you also will hear, that's really brutal. And I'll say it's not so much because it never really focuses on the things they do. It's just really implied on, them torching a town or killing a bunch of people with no second thoughts, and also working for the bad guys at first. So like you're kind of in a position where if you read between the lines or read the other side of that story, you're like, oh, these guys are not really good people until we get later on. But they're still so fascinating, and the way it's written is such done so well that you can't help but like care for these people, even though they're like kind of horrible mercenaries. You sort of also kind of can forgive them because they're just doing it for the money. And then eventually, like I said, they sort of turn and do good deeds. But so like there's just a lot of that where like it'll cut right before a big battle, or it'll cut right before they do something, or it'll just be a mention of like a 1-2 line mention of, oh yeah, we like went through and we burnt this village down because they were working with the rebels, or we tortured these people because we needed answers. But you don't get the details, it's just enough to imply like what's happening. But it's amazing if you're looking for that kind of gritty fantasy series that's focused on it. That what I will say is not George R.R. Martin or Robert Jordan style. You want something a little bleaker and maybe a little less political intrigue. This is definitely a way to go. It's not super fantasy. It's really easy to just assume this is like a modern day setting, because while there is some magic, there's not a lot of it. And while every once in a while there is like not like maybe like a one or two times there's like kind of fantasy type creatures, there's really not. It's really just people against people. And so even if you're not big into fantasy, I think you could read this and be fine, because you're not dealing with all the fantasy tropes that come with everything. But I'm like almost done with the last book in this, and that's why I'm bringing it up, because I'll have it done way before next week. But it's definitely worth checking out. I'm really digging it, and it's addictive enough where you don't stop. And so I always have to kind of force myself to be like, hey, it's time for bed, or like, hey, you need to do house stuff. And so yeah. So anyway, that is Chronicles of the Black Company.
Perfect. I've been eyeing those books since I was in college, like in all honesty.
Yeah, you'll dig it. It's really good. I'm really enjoying them.
Perfect. And Vitlame, anything on your end?
Yes. Finally, I read something.
Yay!
And it actually, same with The Rich. It got me out of my reading slump.
That's good.
You're welcome, Vitlame.
Yes, it was a recommendation by Rich. And,
a book I've never read, but
yeah, funny that you did that. I thought you had read it. I was like, oh my god!
No, I was looking at a list that had a book series I read that was in it, and then I saw that series, and I was like, this sounds really good as well, so I'm going to include it. And like, it seemed like something you'd like, so I'm like, bam, there you go.
Yeah, I was looking because I'm such a slow reader, and also I'm such a mood reader that I just wanted something short but good. So I was asking around if people knew of any like fantasy novellas, because we have a lot of horror novellas, which I love, by the way, but I haven't been introduced to as much to fantasy novellas, and I need to read more fantasy if I'm gonna write fantasy. And Rich recommended this book, which it's called The Lies of the Ajungo by Moses Utomi, I think his name is.
Oh,
it's Moses something Utomi, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna get it for you real quick. So yeah,
Moses Ose Utomi. Yeah, Moses Ose Utomi. That's his author name. He's from Nigeria. Like, he has his roots there, but he lives in the States. Like, I think he lives in Hawaii. And he wrote this short fantasy novella. It's about 90 pages. It's like really short, but it packs everything. It has like a beginning, middle, and a conclusion. And it's a really, really interesting and thought out fantasy world that is inspired by West Africa.
Cool.
And just like the beginning sentence that at the beginning of the story, it's there's no water in the City of Lies, and that really drew me in. I was like, okay, that's interesting. Why? And he goes on to explain it. And there were apparently in this book there was in this city there used to be water, but not anymore, and like it dried up, and the chief, not knowing really what to do, just traveled around the desert. Like there was a huge ass desert around, and they call it the Forever Desert. And they suddenly a tribe or some kind of people called the Ajungo came and visited him and offered him a deal. They said, "We will give you water. We will give you enough water for you guys to survive in exchange for your tongues." So every person, when they reached the age of 13, they would have their tongues cut off. Because no one can tell their stories without their tongues. And then, I mean, they kept their part of the deal. They gave them water, but only just. So when the story begins, and then starts with the story of Tutu, who is a 13-year-old boy. And he's living basically in the slums part of the City of Lies. And they are dying of thirst. And usually children, they get the opportunity in order to avoid having their tongues cut off. They can venture out into the desert in order to search for water. But no one has returned.
Crazy.
And so he witnesses his mother almost dying of thirst. And she's the only thing left in his family, and is the only thing that he really cares about. So to do this for his mother, he decides to go out and seek water elsewhere. And from there, we kind of you get through the journey of him going through the desert and discovering many things that he had never, ever thought of discovering before. I don't want to say too much because this is such a short story. It's only, like I said, it's only 90 pages, but what he discovers is really good. He meets other people, and through those people, he sees that he just kind of discovers that not everything is what it seems. And the twists that the guy managed to pull forth, it's amazing.
Yeah, it sounds awesome.
It really good. He had really good characters there. There were 3 women characters in the story that were really strong, and I really cared about them. And yeah, just in such a short amount of pages, I cared about every single character in this, and I was so intrigued, and I just blazed through the pages. And the ending was so good that I immediately went and bought book number 2.
That's great.
And I finished book number 2 yesterday, and it's called The Truth of the Aleke. And it's kind of it's a sequel, but it has a different kind of story. It happens centuries and centuries after what happened in book 1. And he managed to twist it in a really good way. Like I told Rich, the twist at the end gave me whiplash. It was so good. I'm not gonna spoil anything about that book either. So read the first book and then go and buy the second book and read it, because this is really good. This is how you do fantasy. Because one of the reasons I'm shying away from fantasy is the crazy amount of info dumping that a lot of people tend to do.
Oh yeah.
And that just really pulls me out of the story. I enjoy a good amount of info about world building and everything, but it needs to be authentic. It needs to be put organically through the narrative.
Yes, that's actually one issue I had and I might try him again, but years ago, I tried reading Brandon Sanderson.
Mm-hmm.
Oh God,
with his Mistborn books, because everyone's
yeah.
Oh, the Mistborn trilogy. This is really, really good fantasy.
Yeah.
Like, I remember I got maybe 10 chapters in, and like every 3 chapter, it would just be a chapter where the characters are hanging out and like info dumping about the magic system and the rules of the magic system and how the magic system works. And I'm just like, I am not a fucking child. Let me read the book and figure it out for my fucking self.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then I stopped reading because it pulled me out of the book way too much.
Yeah. I know. This is a problem that I have with fantasy, and as I'm currently writing my fantasy, I'm actively like watching myself not do that.
Yeah.
Because this is something that I hate, and I know a lot of people hate. And it just has to be done organically, or just not at all. Just you can let the people, like the readers, run their own imaginations for it.
Exactly.
So this was a good story for me to work on my fantasy and also to read more fantasy. So yeah, The Lies of the Ajungo, definitely read that.
Nice.
I mean, it's definitely on my list once I get paid, because like after you reading these, I'm like, oh, I gotta read these now.
Yeah.
But a little bit more from my end, but we should probably get moving faster as well, because I know you have a hard stop, Matt.
Yeah.
But real quick, just for me to wrap things up, I am also right now about halfway through City in Ruins by Don Winslow, which is Don Winslow's final book.
Crazy.
And it is fantastic. Like pretty much everything else I've read from Don Winslow.
Yeah.
Like,
I still haven't checked him out yet. I haven't.
Dude, he's so fucking good. Like, honestly, if you want to talk about like how to write with style, Don Winslow. Like, in my opinion, his style is just unmatched. But this book, City in Ruins, it's the end of a trilogy that started with the book City on Fire, which is City on Fire is about the Italian mafia and Irish mob going to war in Providence in the 80s. And the main character, Danny Ryan, Don Winslow based off a character in the Aeneid, because he was reading the Aeneid and it made him think about the Providence Mafia Wars for some reason. And he decided, like, this would be a really interesting way to retell the Aeneid in, like, a modern crime context. So book 1 is Danny Ryan as he's an Irish mob enforcer and the mob wars that break out. Book 2, City of Dreams, is Danny Ryan several years later, having escaped Providence, is now living in Hollywood and is trying to get a movie made of his life story. And some people don't really want that happening because of the secrets that he has and the skeletons in his closet. And that book has one of the most shocking endings I've ever read in a book. Like, when that book ended, my jaw was on the floor. And now the third book is several years later now, and Danny Ryan is the successful owner of a Las Vegas casino and hotel. And he's made it. He's wealthy. He has all the money. He's trying to push his casino business. But the skeletons from his past keep popping up and threatening to ruin everything he's worked for. So we'll kind of see how that plays out as it goes. And as soon as like the FBI got involved in the story, and then a character who I thought was dead appears again, I'm like, oh, I'm fucking in. This is going to be good. This is going to be a fucking train wreck, and I'm here for it.
I love it.
But real quick, just for the sake of time, movies I'd recommend that I've seen recently, I'm going to keep it quick. I saw Longlegs last weekend.
Awesome.
Oh,
John,
lucky.
know if either of you have gotten to see Longlegs yet, or even if it's out in Iceland yet.
No, but I think it will come next week.
Have you seen it yet, Matt?
No, I want to try this week.
So it is Oz Perkins' best movie. I also think it's his attempt at trying to make his style more mainstream.
Well, that's probably good.
But it's still also very Oz Perkins.
Yeah.
Nicolas Cage's character is fucking bonkers. In either the best way or worst way possible. It's either going to work for you or it's not. Like, it works for me. Like, I thought it was pretty unsettling, but some people think it was way too comical. So, like, it really depends on the person. Some people it works really well. Some people not so much. But, like, I thought he was very effectively creepy. Micah Monroe gave a fantastic performance. And it was also really great to see Kiernan Shipka work again with Oz Perkins.
Yeah.
Because Blackcoat's Daughter is such a good movie.
Yeah.
So it was cool to see her pop up for a few minutes in this movie as well.
That's cool.
But pretty much it's just a 90s serial killer throwback movie.
That's awesome.
Like, people are comparing it to Silence of the Lambs, which I can kind of see. You got the woman FBI agent. It's the 90s. Portraits of Bill Clinton have a lot of screen time in this movie. That say no to the 90s. And the movie's pretty much Micah Monroe is hired by the FBI, and she shows signs of being a clairvoyant. So they move her onto a case involving a series of murder-suicides with just a cipher note left behind, signed Longlegs.
Yeah.
And she's trying to figure out who Longlegs is, and her life begins spiraling out of control as she dives into this case. I would personally compare it to Twin Peaks.
Okay.
I would say Silence of the Lambs, I understand the comparison. I would say this is more Fire Walk with Me.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Like, I'd compare Fire Walk with Me to be a better comparison for this movie, just personally speaking. And it is bizarre and unsettling. And all I'll say about Nick Cage's character is he pretty much plays a satanic serial killer who half the time is just him yelling out heavy metal lyrics.
All right.
Like, it is bizarre and it is wild and it's a lot of fun. Another two more that I'm going to pass. Another movie, real quick, recommend The Devil's Bath. It's on Shudder. It's directed by the same people who did The Lodge and Goodnight Mommy.
Okay.
And it's more depressing than The Lodge and Goodnight Mommy.
Perfect.
Which, if you've seen either of those, you know how depressing those movies are.
Yep.
This turns it up a notch. Pretty much, I won't spoil, but the movie takes place in a Polish village. No, Polish. In a Germanic village in the 1700s. And it's about a woman who just gets married, and her husband buys a house that's away from the village and close to his mother. The mother continuously makes our main character feel unwelcome at home. The husband won't have sex with her, and she really wants to be a mother while her mother-in-law is saying how it's terrible she can't get pregnant or have a child yet. But her husband won't initiate sex with her. And we kind of follow her as her mental health begins spiraling out of control with all these things. And the movie, I'm only mentioning this because in the beginning, the movie isn't so much like a horror movie as it is a drama that is depressing and horrific. But all like I wouldn't really say it's a horror movie. It's not scary, you know what I mean? It's not like tense. It's more you're watching a movie of a character slowly self-destructing. is this movie. And what they're trying to do with this movie is have a discussion about this phenomena that happened in Germanic-speaking countries between the 1400s and 1700s, which we call now murder by proxy, or no, suicide by proxy, which pretty much what it was is people who were mentally ill or suicidal or just had no hope and wanted to give up couldn't commit suicide because according to the church, suicide is the greatest sin you can commit. And if you kill yourself, you're not going to see heaven or paradise or anything after. And these are people who are villagers, mostly literate. They believe everything the church says to them because the church is the authority. And so they found a loophole. And the loophole is if you commit a crime so severe and then turn yourself in, you get executed. And before you get executed, you get to confess your sins.
Nice.
So the movie's kind of building up to that. It opens up on a suicide by proxy. That's why it's an early spoiler. The opening of the movie is literally a woman walking. She sees a child a baby by itself crying. She picks up the baby, walks away, walks to a waterfall, then throws the baby off the cliff.
Oh my God.
Then goes to the town and turns herself in for the murder, which then they cut her head off.
That is an opening.
So the movie makes it clear that's what it's about from the beginning. And it's kind of looking at what it takes to push somebody to have to do this, you know?
Yeah.
And they did say in their research that they've done, in the majority of the cases, it was women. And in the majority of the cases, it was a woman killing a child.
Jeez.
Is what led to the confession to the suicide by proxy. So it's a horrible thing, but it really happened in the past, and they want to try to shine light on it in the movie. It's a good movie. It's just really, really depressing.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
But that's it for me. I also finished The Boys, but I won't get into that can of worms. But Matt, what about you, if you have anything else?
Yeah, just real quick, I have an anthology called Haunted Reels, which is, I think it's like 29 short stories by like horror directors and horror movie writers. It's got a ton of people in it. It's got Justin Benson, Aaron Moorhead, Bria Grant, Izzy Lee, C. Robert Cargill. I mean, it's a lot. There's a ton of people in this, and they all wrote stories, and it's a lot of fun. I will say, like, majority of the stories are great. There's just a couple stories that you can tell this person's used to writing for a movie, and the stories themselves feel a bit like almost like a pitch or like a treatment. Like they're gonna tell somebody in 5 pages what they want to make their movie of, and so it feels very, I don't know how to describe it, technical, like movie technical, where just the descriptions feel more like movie descriptions, like you would see in a script of what a setting would look like. Not to say it's a bad thing. It's interesting to kind of read it that way, but it compared to some of the other people who seem like they're used to, like, I mean, C. Robert Cargill's written a ton outside of movies, so like you can tell his style is very much, he's used to writing actual fiction and stuff. Yeah. But overall, it's awesome. It's cool to kind of see these people like basically have no budget because they're just writing on the page, and the things they come up with and the things that they decide to write on. I mean, there's funny stories in here. Some gross ones where like it deals with a woman who marries very high up, and she's doing everything she can to impress this person, but she has a yeast infection. And this yeast infection sort of takes over in a very gross, but for me, very funny way. So you have stuff like that. And then you have more like personal stories. There's one where this guy has cancer and he lives in a world where there's a certain pill you can take that will give you 24 hours and then you die, or it's 48 hours, something like that. And so he decides, he takes the pill, and then this is kind of his last 24 hours to live life to the fullest. And he meets up with a very old girl, or a girl that he was in love with from a long time ago. They kind of rekindle their relationship, and then he's gonna kind of tell her, hey, like, I took this pill, I have like an hour left. So you have stories like that too, and everywhere in between. So it's just, it's really neat. It's fun to see some of these people, like I said, explore and see what their minds are. It's definitely worth checking out if you're looking for a new anthology, and it's called Haunted Reels.
Perfect.
And that's it for me.
And Vitlame, anything else for you?
No, that's basically it.
All right, let's dive into our sequel talk, TM.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
right.
Yeah, I like, just to I know we've prefaced it a lot, but I think, gosh, this was one of the last times it was just Vitlame and I, and we started talking about sequels. I can't even remember if we were talking about movie sequels and then we jumped into books or vice
I think
versa.
so.
Yeah, and it just it spurred like this really like thought even in both of us, where it's just like this fan like this thing where you're like, why don't we see it as much as we see it in movies? Like Rich, like you said at the beginning, there's so many Halloween, Friday 13th, Child's Play, like we could go on and on. That's like the bread and butter of horror movies is sequels, especially after the 80s. Everyone was churning them out, and it's not even just one or two, it's like 6, 7. I mean, what, Saw has like 15, I don't know, but like,
yeah,
it seems like that's more in movies, like, just, I don't want to say guaranteed because it's not guaranteed, but that's just the way most things go. You're going to watch a movie and you're like, well, this one's probably going to have a sequel. And it's just,
it's interesting.
Compare that to horror fiction, where you're like, besides like the ones that we'll bring up, and again, like we said, there might be a ton more that we don't realize it or don't know about, but it doesn't seem as prevalent in horror fiction. So
well, since we're digging into this now, maybe it has something to do with the subgenres.
Okay.
Maybe.
I think that it just occurred to me right now. Like, we were talking about the Halloween and Jason Voorhees and everything. Those are slashers, right?
Yeah.
And that has kind of like survived every single decade. It has always come back one way or another. And I've now seen there's like, I think the slasher subgenre might be able to get through as a sequel or a series in fiction. We can see that now, for example, with Stephen Graham Jones' series.
Yep. And Brian McCultree, he's got that Candy Cane Kills, and now he's got a sequel to that coming out.
Exactly. So maybe it has something to do with the subgenres, and I'm not just only talking about slashers, because the zombie genre.
Yeah.
That is also kind of prevalent. Like you can see that in you watch a lot of horror movies that have zombies, and they are a franchise, like the Resident Evil series.
Yeah.
And David Wellington's actually has a zombie series.
Yeah, and like I guess
his Monster Islands.
Yes.
Or the Brian Keene, his zombie. Does he have a series of that?
Yeah, I mean, he has The Rising and City of the Dead, and then there's like the short story collection.
Yeah.
Okay.
But more recently, and this also is kind of what I was thinking of too, because David Wellington does have the zombie series, The Monster Island, which I have book 1 of, meaning to read it. He also has a vampire series too.
Yes, he has, and they're actually really good.
But if
But
I
again,
want to
again,
like,
this
again, I
again,
want
this
to
is something to do with the subgenres, or the creatures that are
yes.
always like they're legendary. You will always be able to find some kind of connection with any of those.
Yeah.
So
And like
if we
I'll go on.
I was gonna say if we rewind to Brian Keene real quick, not to change the topic, like okay, I'm on Goodreads right now just to clarify for like review averages and review ratings, okay? The Rising Book 1 has over 10,000 ratings. Right? That's a lot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The Rising Book 2, City of the Dead, that decreases from over 10,000 ratings to just over 6,000 ratings.
Huh.
So right there, this is like a big series of zombie books. I remember when I read The Rising when it came out when I was in high school.
Yeah.
Like I remember the buzz around this book when it was out. I remember all of that. And to see it now going from over 10,000 reviews for the first book to then just over 6,000 for the second, why didn't the second one sell as much as the first one did? Or maybe it did. Why are the reviews such a discrepancy? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
then if we keep... Oh, you go.
No, I was just gonna say, like, and I have a feeling you're probably going that way. That could just the idea of, and like, I don't know, we don't have the numbers for movies, but obviously if you make more than 2 of a series, there must be some money in there, or it's, it's cheap to make, I guess, too. But that is like, I don't have the numbers to compare if that's like a similar comparison. But I have a feeling like you can compare it to that and say like, yeah, they made 12 Halloween movies because people keep going to them. Where in book, like looking at book wise, like you said, those numbers, or it's like, it makes sense to kind of stop after 2 or 3.
Going back to that, I think also the reason why people would prefer sequels or series like in movie form is maybe the visual aspect.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I mean, and that's it, that, like, I should say for listeners is like, obviously, I mean, that is going to be a factor. Not only that, but reading like the time to read. It's easy to watch an hour and a half movie and then jump into the sequel and watch another hour and a half movie. A book might take you a week, depending on how fast you read and stuff like that. It might take you longer. And then obviously for the writer, it's going to take more time. So like you have to wait a year and stuff like that.
Not even a year. It can take like years.
Yeah.
Like a year is putting a whole lot of pressure on a writer.
Fair.
Believe me, I've been there.
I know. We need to get your opinion, and we can take some time and talk to you about it, because we know you have a series, or like a trilogy at least.
Yeah.
Well, also, I'm still on Brian Keene. So most recently, Brian Keene has been putting out like his Labyrinth books, which are like him trying to do the Dark Tower, where he brings all his books together in like this universe Avengers team up type thing, right?
Yeah.
I've read the first book, The Seven. I thought it was really good. On Goodreads, The Seven has 168 ratings and 16 reviews.
So,
which makes sense because it's self-published. Like Brian Keene, like part of why The Rising has so many, like 10,000 reviews, is that was a mainstream novel.
Yeah.
That was sold in airports. That was an airport novel. Airport novels make money. They sell. They move numbers. So you're going to see in a majorly published airport novel, and I don't mean that as an insult, you're gonna see more sells.
Yeah.
Because people buy books at airports all the time. It's one of the most biggest things sold in an airport. Now with Brian Keene being self-published, the fan base has shrunken to like, his core fan base, or the people who like his stuff a lot. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. So like, I don't personally speaking, 168 ratings on a self-published book on Goodreads, I think that's good.
Yeah.
Right. Then we go to the second book, Submerged. that drops down to 103 ratings.
Yeah.
Again, it's not much, but it's still dropping, and the number of written reviews drops from 16 reviews to 5 reviews.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and like I haven't read the second book, so I don't want to be like, this is because the second book is bad, but it's more like a lot of people seem to like the first book, but yet we're seeing less buzz on the second.
Right.
Or like another one that comes to mind, and again, I'm not calling this book out because I've read the first book and I thought it was great, but on the Haley Piper,
the Cosmic Horror one,
yeah, the Cosmic Horror one, Worm and His Kings.
The Worm trilogy, yeah.
I loved Worm and His Kings. I thought that book was great.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't read the sequel. I've been meaning to.
I have.
But and is the sequel just as good? I imagine it is because she's a great writer.
Yeah, it's really good. I listened to both of them on audio as audiobooks, and they were really, really nice. So immediately as I finished the second book, I pre-ordered the third one.
I need to read the second one, but I'm looking at the just reviews now. For the first book, we have 1,882 ratings, which it's really good for an indie book on Goodreads, right?
Yeah, and a novella at that as well.
Yeah,
and then
wild.
Are you ready for book number 2?
Oh God,
147 ratings.
Wow. Yeah, that's like
and again, none of these are calling out the quality of the books. Like
no, I think
which is out.
Yeah, just out. It came out.
It's down to 31 ratings.
Yeah. So. My hypothesis is that it has to do with time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because as we've established, like writing takes a hell of a lot more time to produce a book than it is to get a movie out, because you have so many people doing that together.
Yes.
Like there's so many helping hands there. As a writer, you're basically just on your own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and then I wonder.
My thing is.
And then also you have to also take into consideration, like when it comes to the sequels and the movies and everything, the marketing there. Like they have actual producers, like production companies, doing the marketing. While we as writers, we have to do the marketing all by ourselves, and it is hard to market a sequel in a series because there are so many people that might not have read the first one.
Yeah.
So usually it's what we do. At least in my case, I've been pushing my first book more to get more readers, so they would be more interested in reading the rest of the books.
Yeah, or like even the book I'm reading, like not to cut me off, Matt. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
Well, even like City in Ruins, even though it's last book of a trilogy, you can still read it on its own. Because while he doesn't recap the entire first 2 books, he gives you enough backstory in the first couple chapters. One, to refresh readers, but also to get everyone caught up to speed. And then he just carries on from there. So there are ways to carry it through, but.
And I'm actually glad I waited, because that's part of what I'm wondering. And Vitlame, this is going to be a good question for you.
Mm-hmm.
And when you were writing that first book, were you already planning that to be a trilogy, or did it kind of, you were like, no, I want to keep going with these characters when you finished it?
That I mentioned it in the acknowledgments in the first book that no, this in my head, this was supposed to be a standalone when I first started drafting it.
Yeah. Okay.
But when I was finished with the basically doing like the final touches to the book, and I just remembered like, okay, this is probably gonna be it. And then I was at work and I was just doing the dishes. A thought struck me and just said, hey, by the way, this could happen to Leia if you want to continue.
Okay.
And like she basically was kind of knocking on my head, like, "Hey, but I know I'm awkward as hell, but my story is not done yet."
All right, that's so okay. That's a good one point. And then Rich, for you, and I don't know if he mentioned it already at the start, but did he plan to make that a trilogy, or did it sort of
Yes.
just okay?
When the first book was announced, he said there was going to be a whole trilogy.
Okay, interesting. So kind of and it's good to kind of get these two info, because kind of a thought on this is, and just knowing, even like reading Worm and the King, I think Worm and the King, I think it is.
Worm and the Kings?
Yeah, like I'm trying to remember if it felt very much like it was going to be the first of a trilogy or not. And like, because I remember, I mean, like, because we've all read.
It was a standalone. It just felt like a good, solid standalone novella.
Yeah, I agree. I thought like the ending of book one, like The Worm and His King with Monique, I thought it ended really good. Like it was bleak as fuck.
Yeah, yes.
But it felt like, yeah, this is a good ending. But when she announced that it was going to continue, but the thing, what she did though, is that she put it in the perspective of another character.
Yes.
That's usually like, if you're not sure if your book is going to be a series or a standalone. And I think this is also might be a good point for other writers, that they might gravitate towards the point of view of another character.
Yes.
Yes.
And that's kind of, so like, but just kind of thinking out loud with all of that kind of information, and thinking when you bring up like reviews and numbers and stuff like that, as writers, especially in the indie horror scene, but I'm sure in every scene, you know, you are always kind of looking towards the next story. And so there is a little bit of that, like when unless you like kind of go plan, I'm going to write this as a trilogy, you know, you're writing other stuff. And that's where that long gap kind of comes in, is because you have somebody knocking on your thoughts, and you're like, oh, I want to go back to this character or this world. And so I'm wondering if what that gives us is that big gap between the first book and the second book in some of these cases, or why we only get one book is because we maybe weren't planning to go further.
I think it also depends on both us, for the readers and the writers, like how much investment is in the character.
Yeah. Also, too,
because you can, like, for example, if you're watching movies, to me, I'm not that much invested in the characters when I'm watching a horror movie.
Yeah,
I'm more invested in how the plot's going on, and if the characters live, great, that's awesome. But for me, it's more of the plot, because you always know when you're watching horror, you always know people are gonna die. You don't give a shit.
Yeah,
you're there for the horror, like the horror plot or the horror elements. You're just for the gory stuff, or the creepy stuff, or anything like that. But when you're reading it in fiction, for me, I don't know, it might not happen, it might not feel like for listeners here, but for me, I feel more I'm more invested in the characters when I'm reading horror fiction.
Yeah, well, you're spending more time, you're usually in their head at some
yes.
And so you're kind of with that, where, yeah, like, you know, I'm just thinking again of the big series. I mean, most of them weren't really planning on doing sequels. Like for Halloween, they weren't really planning that. That was, I mean, it's John Carpenter's famous for being said he didn't want to do a sequel. So like that, or even like the first Nightmare on Elm Street. Yeah, it sort of ends in a way, but I think that was like, even with the second one, that wasn't Wes Craven's plan. That was somebody else's plan. And then when they realized it was bigger, he kind of helped bring it along. But like,
I kind of want to like. Oh, sorry, I'm interjecting.
No, it's okay.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
It's just that kind of idea of like, so for some of those people, they weren't planning it, and then it just was the big sales, and then the people asking for more. And like, you can kind of look at that in the book world too, where it's like, there's certain series, and if we step out of horror and look at fantasy books and look at the really famous ones, I mean, those were the ones that like they knew it was going to be an epic, and so they kind of planned it that way and kind of alluded to, hey, this isn't done. Like, I mean, obviously George R. R. Martin's still not done, and I don't think he ever will be, but like he knew
I want Winds of Winter so bad.
Yeah, but like he was planning at least those first couple books, and then I think these other ones sort of came out after realizing the story he made needed more room.
You know what's funny? Have you ever read the Wheel of Time books?
No.
Nope.
Those were originally supposed to be a trilogy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that I heard about that, and then it's like
14 books in total.
Yeah, it's like 10 plus books.
Yeah. So
it's funny that you mentioned about like the filmmakers, like the directors not wanting it to be a series in the beginning with us, and like I said, because people wanted more, and also they were getting pressure from the producers and the movie companies because they wanted to make more money.
Yeah.
So for them, making a franchise is a money grabbing machine.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think part of what comes to this, sorry to cut you off, Philip.
No, it's fine.
But this is, I think, an aspect of the conversation we're not looking at, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Let's take the big fantasy books, for example. Your Brandon Sandersons, right? Your Joe Abercrombie. So I love Joe Abercrombie, but he's a big fantasy author now. You have all these books have the backing of the major publishers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like these are all books, Orbit Books, Tor, Penguin, Random House, right? They're all like, they all have the advertising power behind them. They have the big book machine power behind them. And like, again, using Brian Keaton as an example, we saw the Goodreads numbers of his books when he had that machine behind him versus where he is now in his career, right?
Yeah.
So what if it could also be a horror being a mostly small press genre?
Yeah.
Leading authors to have to do self-promotion.
Yeah.
And on top of that, the necessity of staying relevant in a small press market is to consistently be putting out work.
Yeah.
Or else whatever you're writing falls to the wayside, right?
Yeah.
How often are sequels going to be in talks there? Because really, every time I write a story, I don't know if it's the same for you guys, but when I write a story, I'm not planning on a sequel.
Yeah.
For me, because I'm a creator, like an artist as well, that is sometimes usually not possible for me to not think of like continuing on the story.
Yeah.
But like I have other stories planned that will not be sequels. Like they will not be like the cover that Matt Wilderson did for me, Cadaver Island.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's going to be like a standalone.
Oh, nice. Yeah, it's I think part of it could be a small press thing.
Yeah, and like because I think you're right on that, because you're kind of looking as a publisher. Not that I am a publisher, but as a publisher, you're looking at what's selling, what books can I kind of like, either writers, because what writers are popular and who can I get to publish, like
you're also forgetting one thing also that the publishers are doing. What's safe?
Yes. And so you're kind of like, because you don't have, like in movies or even some of these bigger publishers, they're not signing. I mean, maybe they are, some people are, but like majority of what we see is not like, I'm signing you for a 5-book deal and 3 of these books need to be this trilogy or whatever like that. You like, and again, maybe that's happening and we're not seeing it, but like everyone's posting publishers marketplaces, so we know most of the time it's a 1-book deal.
Yeah.
So like,
I'm interested in one thing though, because you mentioned Josh Malerman.
Yeah.
Rich.
Yes.
he's a big ass author now. Like he is, I think he's represented in one of the big five, right?
Yeah, he is.
Yeah.
Big three.
Yeah.
Still the big five, Matt.
Okay. I've only watched the Bird Box movie, so I haven't read the book, but I know it's kind of similar. I don't know if I can ever ask him that, but Josh, if you're ever listening to this, I am interested to know whether you were thinking of this as a standalone, or if the publishing company were pressuring you into making a sequel for Mallory.
Question. Yeah.
So I actually can kind of answer that a little bit from what I know.
All right.
So what I know about Josh Malerman is this is something. So originally he's in a rock band. I think he's still in that band. I forget their name though. But
something steady.
Like is it the high? I was confused.
Or high strung.
High strung. I'm like, I always confuse her name with the Hold Steady.
Yeah,
that's why I'm like, but with Josh Malerman, his whole thing is he sat down and just wrote books before he even published Bird Box. Like by the time Bird Box was published, he had 12 manuscripts ready to go.
God damn.
Right, and so it was just like how much this dude writes and how much he puts out. I don't think he planned to write a sequel to Bird Box because the ending of the first book feels pretty solid.
Yeah, that's what.
That's what I think it too. I was like, it should have just ended like that.
And like, I read Mallory. I thought Mallory was okay. I don't think it was amazing. I thought it had some really great moments, some really meh moments.
The thing with sequels or like just basically writing a series is that you always have to be aware of tying up loose ends.
Yeah.
Yes.
Did that feel that for you when you were reading Mallory?
A little bit, but it also adds more questions, which makes me think he might be planning a third book.
Exactly. So if it's not tying up those loose ends, if it's more inviting more questions, then yes, you can definitely have the feeling that it might invite another book into the series. But this is like, I think this is also why, and again, this is just my theory or like my hypothesis, like the reason why a lot of people don't venture that often into like sequels when it comes to fiction is that they're afraid of that. They're afraid of not getting the questions answered, or they're not being loose.
But I'm gonna take this conversation and press the rewind button a little bit. And I know we're gonna be wrapping things up soon too, but I wanted to think about this as well. So like Brian Lumley passed away recently.
Yeah.
And have either of you ever read Necroscope?
No.
Okay. I've read the first two. I need to get back to the third one eventually. I have the audiobooks. They're so cheesy and fun. But like I remember being a kid in the early 2000s and late 90s and going to the library and seeing those Necroscope book covers.
Yeah.
Like those old Necroscope book covers were gnarly in like the best way possible. Just like the freaky ass vampire skulls. Like
they were
so intriguing, awesome. Right? But like that is a 5 or 6 book series that leads into a 3-book trilogy.
All right.
And the whole thing's kind of planned out from the beginning, so it does flow pretty well. And he kind of models the book after spy thrillers. So the idea being is like spy thrillers can go on for a long time.
Yeah.
Because it's the same spy or organization, right? Mm-hmm. So he kind of puts that into the vampire thing.
Mm-hmm.
Even going up and like those books, like again, I wasn't in the conversation when they were around, but a lot of people hold those books in a high regard. You also have, even they've been out of print for a while, you had Mamie Wade Wellman's John the Balladeer stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at my John the Balladeer hardcover omnibuses right now. Because I have 2 hardcover books. One is all the John the Balladeer short stories, and the other is all the novels, kind of all together. But you have like people who are big names in horror talk about John the Balladeer in such high regards, and like those books being so successful, right? So like we have had successful horror book series in the past.
Yeah. Well, and it's
when were they written and when were they published?
The 70s, 60s, and 70s.
Exactly. Now there you're seeing here now that the how should I say, the marketing or like the publishing wasn't as big at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was more available to everyone, or like it was not that much that you can like get. Nowadays, it's like you can get so many books from everywhere. Like it's almost the same as much a problem as with streaming services right now. So you're just kind of like,
it's overwhelming.
Yeah, it's overwhelming. You're like you kind of get anxiety just choosing what to read.
Well, and that's a good like the also thinking about that time, you didn't have as much to watch, like TV options, and
Exactly.
like regardless of if it's good or bad, there's so many options now. It's easy to, like I said, even with movies, it's easy to kind of get sucked into a TV show and have it be just as good. But back then it was not so much. So yeah, you were looking to get the whatever serial book was out or whatever series was out. I'm also thinking like, sorry, just like
it's okay.
A little bit off of this topic, but sort of on the same topic, is that we hear a lot about in certain genres, it's more popular reading a bigger book. Fantasy, it's easier to read, people are used to 600, 700 page book, where a horror book is a little bit more a novella length, or maybe a little bit longer than that. But that's kind of like the common thing to talk about, is like horror lasts better in a shorter amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if that plays into a sequel trilogy.
I think so. I definitely think so. Because for the fantasy, like you said, they have to be that big. It's because for the readers, that is all about the journey.
Yeah. And the world that you're in.
And the world that you're in and stuff like that. But when it comes to escapism into horror, as I've mentioned before, like when you're watching horror, it's for the horror itself. It's for the thing that will make your skin crawl.
Yeah.
And you can't really do a lot of that in a big ass book.
Yeah, exactly.
Because if you draw that out, you like the reader, I think, will become a little bit more desensitized to it, more numb to it as well. So for me, when it comes to horror, it has to be around 350 pages.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like,
I agree.
We've covered other books, like longer horror books, and it was as part of our joke is after a while you're just like, okay, like
right?
You could cut out all of this.
What book was it? What was it again that we ranted so much about?
Oh my gosh, it's a really popular
The Ceremonies.
One. Yes, The Ceremonies.
Yeah. That book fucking sucked. Oh my god!
Oh my god! It was so big and it was so long. It was like, get to the fucking point.
And it was so misogynistic. Like,
it was.
But like that, it was a slog.
And it's funny because if you think about it, like all of that stuff that happened in there, if you were reading a fantasy or just a regular fiction book, people would have been fine because it's the journey. It's the getting you into that world and what's happening on that farm and stuff like that. But
it's the repetition of it that was so boring.
Yeah. Yes. And so
like I could read a 600-page fantasy book and be enthralled because the repetition isn't really there.
Yeah.
This was like it was the same thing over and over and over.
Yeah.
Although I will say this, and this will be, we got to do our goodbye soon.
Yeah.
The novella that inspired him to write the ceremonies, because he wrote it as a novella first.
Yeah.
That blows my mind every single time I remember it.
That novella is actually really, really good.
Yeah.
Probably because it's a novella and it kind of run all the bullshit. But that novella was really good. But I feel like I would like to see horror series to catch on more. Maybe authors either pre-planning series or trying to make these more a thing. But I also think like it's harder for these to catch on in the book scene now.
Yes.
I mean,
because of time.
Yeah. I think time's the biggest thing. And, I was just thinking, even like you brought up Brian Keene or even like Stephen King and the Dark Tower stuff, where Dark Tower, like the 7 books are part of that. I think one way to play with that in our world and a novella world is basing if you're going to do more than one, basing it in that world or giving little Easter eggs and hints of other things that happen in other stories. Because then I only have to pick up one of the novellas and the story is fine. But if I read 3 other ones of yours, I'm getting a deeper story of your world. And I think that's a smart mix, a blend of the two, because they're sort of sequels, but they're not. But you're still giving a person like a big fan who's reading all your work. You're still you're rewarding them by saying, hey, you read my first book and look, here's some characters that show up, but you don't need to know about it. I don't know. Yeah. That might be a good mix.
That could work, and it does work for some people.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't think there's a good answer. I think
no, I don't think we'll ever get a definitive answer to this, but it's still a good discussion, and I think readers in general should also think about this as well.
Yeah.
Because for me, as we mentioned, with the availability of books and everything, when I was a kid, and as I've mentioned it so many fucking times, I think I should probably just do this every day, when we do our show, that I should always mention at the beginning, by the way, I didn't read Stephen King when I was a kid. Because they translated it so fucking poorly in Icelandic, and they didn't have a lot of the Stephen King books in Iceland, so I'm not into the Stephen King scene, unfortunately. So because of that, when some others had to go through other outlets for horror, and for me that was movies.
Yeah, it's not too late to join the Stephen King scene.
It is.
It is.
I'm sorry. I mean, I like Carrie. I liked Carrie and I like The Night Shift, but some of the stories I can't get into.
I will say, I think you dig Pet Sematary, but it doesn't know cat stuff.
I've seen the movies. It was hard for me. Come on, man.
So mean.
Yeah.
I try. But we got to wrap things up. Vitlame, where can listeners get in touch with you?
They can get in touch with me on Twitter at VitlameAs and also on my website at vitlamemistauthor.com. I finally updated it a little bit.
Yay!
People can buy signed copies on my website, and I can and the only thing you have to pay is just for the shipping, and that's it.
Nice.
That's awesome. And Matt, what about you?
Yeah, Twitter at BrandenburgDM and the website matt-brandenburg.com.
And you can follow me on Twitter with @IntoStaring and on Instagram with @Rudy53088. And this is Richard Gerlach saying keep staring.